We usually begin our episodes with, so, today on the podcast we have, but sometimes the best laid plans of writers don't always work out. I started this past week finalizing the script for what I believed would be the final episode in our series about Walt Disney and screenwriter Larry Watkin as they created Darby O'Gill and the Little People. But then on Wednesday, there was this unexpected news from Florida that has the potential to rework plans for the Florida resort. Once that came out, I simply set aside the story of Larry Watkin and Darby O'Gill, at least for a little while, and checked sources around the Florida story, read a bunch of government documents, and started to assemble a new episode focused on how the Disney resort in Florida is likely to expand in the coming years. So we have an interesting show today. I'm marking this news episode as part 1 for the month, as almost surely there's another wave of news coming out in the next week or two, including news about the Disneyland Forward plan in California. But today, we're going to unravel some complex stories that mostly involve the resort in Florida and also the battle over the Disney board. We're just going to jump right in because there is a lot to cover. So, if you're ready, let's go. Earlier this past week, on Wednesday, March 27th, Disney and the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, that's the CFTOD, came to a settlement over some issues regarding how the district would be managed moving forward. At best, this is a compromise arrangement. To sum it all up in a nutshell, Disney has now agreed to abide by DeSantis's board members only after some of the most anti-Disney elements were removed from the CFTOD, and also assuming that the remaining and new members focus on creating a development plan that will allow Disney World to expand in the near future. The governor, for his part, now saves face, which may not have happened in court, and Disney can move forward with the business of arranging theme park expansion, an outcome that may have been delayed by years if both court cases, the one from the state and the one from federal, proceeded with their various dates and appeals. But there's more here down in the details. As you recall, before the Disney-friendly Reedy Creek board members were ousted from power, they voted to shift some aspects of the district's power over to Disney, specifically how and where future resort elements, such as a theme park, hotels, a water park, could be built. Under that development agreement, Reedy Creek, shortly before losing governmental power, essentially handed certain planning and zoning rights for land improvements and related projects over to Disney, projects that could be created over the next decade from 2022 up through 2032. This effectively cut the DeSantis-approved board managers out of the loop, leaving them there to manage roads, fire departments, and other emergency services. It essentially rendered the new board powerless, which caused them to seek legal ways to make that deal null and void. This, in ways, left Disney in limbo, unsure if they could rely on the 2022 development deal or if it might be invalidated, possibly after they began work on selected projects. The solution to this problem largely was a settlement that was announced last week. The settlement seeks to fix not only the issue of development, but a range of legal issues that were just about to move into the courts. The settlement, at least for now, stops or pauses legal proceedings and the release of documents and testimony that may have been damaging to the CFTOD, the governor's office, and possibly Disney. The settlement also comes just days before Disney's annual shareholders meeting and the vote to either re-elect current Disney board members or to add outside challengers Nelson Peltz and Jay Rizzullo, both of whom Iger opposed. Now that the Disney stock price, after the Iger-arranged stock buyback and also the Epic Games partnership, is not only above $100 per share, but over $120 per share, Iger shouldn't have much to worry about in terms of the board vote. But Disney is signaling that the vote, likely from their own polling, appears to be far closer than is comfortable for them. But to get down into the settlement details and what it all means, let's start here. The recent settlement between Disney and the CFTOD represents a directional shift for Disney, and one that surprises me a little, especially after Disney's statements 2 months ago, back in January, where company officials claimed that the dispute between Disney and the state represented key issues that not only define Disney's future, but also the future of American business in general. At that time, Disney was insistent that they would stand on principle, as they believed their First Amendment rights had been knowingly violated. But also this shift now may be necessary as Disney actively plans out expansions at the Florida resort for the coming years and possibly to shore up support at the shareholders meeting next week. In the settlement, Disney now agrees that the vote, which presumably gave them power to manage resort expansion over the next decade, is now void. This is referenced as the 2032 plan, as it gave Disney great control over how it expanded the resort up through 2032. In terms of the actual settlement language, it says, Disney agrees and covenants not to challenge the district's determination that the district's 2032 comprehensive plan and the amendments to the district's land development regulations, which were purportedly adopted in January and February 2023, are null and void, leaving the 2020 comprehensive plan as the operative plan. Disney here will instead work with the CFTOD concerning future planning, specifically rolling back the resort's comprehensive plan to the one from 2020, before the state of Florida voted to sunset Reedy Creek and establish the CFTOD in its place. This plan, like most comprehensive plans, is arranged as an outline as to how the resort will likely expand in coming years, but it's also open to change and alteration if the two groups can agree on what now should be built and where. In order to create a less litigious environment, Disney has also agreed to pause, at least temporarily, the appeal on the federal First Amendment case as well. In this, Disney seems to be signaling that it will end the federal appeal if the CFTOD will agree to a new development plan that interests Disney. This is one of the very few concessions that Disney received in the settlement, namely that, and here again I will quote from the settlement language, the district shall resolve to begin immediately to review, evaluate, and amend the 2020 comprehensive plan pursuant to its statutory obligations and shall consult with Disney and any other appropriate parties during the process. That is, the CFTOD has said that it will now work with Disney to find a mutually agreeable plan that will define how the Disney resort expands in the upcoming years. As this is the prime concession in the entire settlement, I'm pretty sure that this is what Disney felt was most necessary at the moment. A public statement that put 2 years of litigation behind them, the ability to pivot away from a highly politicized dispute, and a sure path to plan how the resort could move forward with future developments. And this, I think, reveals that Disney is now very serious about expansion in Florida. Shortly after the settlement was announced, Jeff Vail, president of Walt Disney World, released a statement. We're pleased to put an end to all litigation pending in state court in Florida between Disney and the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. This agreement opens a new chapter of constructive engagement with the new leadership of the district and serves the interest of all parties by enabling significant continued investment and the creation of thousands of direct and indirect jobs and economic opportunity in the state. Charbel Bakarit, vice chair of the CFTOD, said, with this settlement, which is complete and significant, we are eager to work with Disney. Even Governor DeSantis, in a statement given on the afternoon that the agreement was made public, sought in small ways to mend fences with Disney, pointing out how he wanted this to be both a win for the state and for Disney. So we have an interest as a state in moving forward to make this region very strong, he said. This Tourism Oversight Board, and that district is a big part of that. I think that there's going to be ways where, we can do things that are in the best interest of the state of Florida, and I think Disney can be part of that. DeSantis also claimed, rather strangely, that his disagreements were primarily with the California-based studio and California-based executives, not with the Florida resort, which was at least a unique way of looking at this decision. But in terms of the timeline, it's probably worth noting that this settlement came not long after DeSantis dropped out of the presidential race. DeSantis dropped out of the running in January, and this settlement appeared late in March. In looking over the materials now, along with the changes to the CFTOD personnel, I'm pretty sure serious conversations have been going on between Disney and the DeSantis camp for at least a month, maybe a little longer, which means that days, or maybe a couple of weeks, after DeSantis dropped out of the presidential race, he or some of his people were working to undo some of the damage that had been created with Disney. From a campaign perspective, the state's conflict with Disney had significant value for DeSantis in terms of framing his public identity as a presidential candidate who stood up to large corporations. It also helped his campaign fundraise. But since leaving the national race, DeSantis was left with an in-state dispute that was harming state tourism and preventing one of its largest private businesses from committing to expansion that now lacked any meaningful value for his future political ambitions. Almost surely, one of the reasons that so little has been officially announced for Disney World in the coming years has been the ongoing difficulties with the CFTOD and the insecurity over which comprehensive plan would eventually be authoritative. That is, with DeSantis losing the primary election and with Iger looking at a very troubling board vote, both sides were left wondering if the battle moving forward was now worth the cost. The settlement, at least right now, only pertains to the state case with Disney. It's worth noting that the settlement does not currently affect the federal lawsuit in which Disney claims that its First Amendment rights were violated. In that suit, Disney claimed that the removal of Reedy Creek and the establishment of the CFTOD was a type of political retaliation for speaking out against a Florida bill that concerned the discussion of gender identity and sexual orientation in public schools. This is now perhaps the only remaining pressure that Disney has to make sure that work between them and the CFTOD moves forward in a reasonable fashion. Disney has agreed to pause, but not to end, its federal appeal while they work toward a new agreement about the future developments inside the district. If I'm reading this all right, this leaves Disney with the option to still pursue the federal suit, but it also suggests that after nearly 2 years of litigation, Disney is trying to find a workable solution with the CFTOD rather than spending additional months or more likely additional years in court. Disney may also be looking ahead to the 2024 or even the 2026 elections and calculating how likely it is that changes to the state government will be less friendly to Disney than the current arrangement. In effect, assuming that Disney and the CFTOD can agree upon a mutually beneficial plan concerning how the resort expands in the coming years, Disney is now signaling to the district that it will end all lawsuits if the CFTOD will create an agreement that Disney finds workable. Officially, Disney has now agreed to wait on pursuing its federal appeal. Again, here's the settlement language. Pending negotiation, among other matters, of a new development agreement between Disney and the district. In terms of Disney's motivation now, the settlement comes during the same week that the CFTOD appointed a new board member and a new administrator, both of whom are far more Disney-friendly than previous appointees. The new board member is Craig Mater, who was once the CEO of Bags Incorporated, a luggage handling business that worked as a longtime vendor with Disney. Bags Incorporated under Mater allowed customers to check in their luggage in their hotel lobby and then have it delivered to the airline. It also allowed for airline luggage to be delivered directly to Bell Services, which then placed it in a guest's hotel room. Essentially, his business was a key part of the now-defunct Magical Express system. He is the first person on the CFTOD board who has a strong previous business relationship with Disney. He replaces Martin Garcia, who was at times openly hostile to the Disney company. The CFTOD also appointed Stephanie Kopolosis as the new district administrator, as opposed to some previous appointees whose main attraction may have been their political outlook. Kopolosis has previous experience with project budgeting, emergency services, and infrastructure development. She was also the Clay County manager for 8 years. That is, she certainly seems well qualified. She has a career history in political and governmental roles where she has also worked with legislation that has been beneficial to the Disney resort. That the board makeup and administration was changed with both new appointees and an overall revised attitude toward Disney at the same time as the settlement was announced is probably not a coincidence. Almost surely this suggests that some behind-the-scenes discussions have been happening for a while, with Disney looking for a more Disney-friendly board and administration, also with Disney looking for confidence that it will be able to move resort expansion plans forward with ease. From the Disney side again, this settlement also allows Disney, just days before the shareholders meeting and that vote for its own corporate board, to tell shareholders that there is now a plan in place to move the Florida resort forward by working with the CFTOD. I think this deal, which at least in its language is more favorable to the state and the CFTOD than it is to Disney, also suggests how concerned Disney executives are about that upcoming shareholders meeting and the vote for the Disney board seats. The main benefit to Disney, again, is this. The settlement now allows Disney to seek approval for new additions to the Florida resort, working in a way that those developments can't be later challenged by the CFTOD. It also clearly suggests that the CFTOD now will not slow walk permits or otherwise gum up the process to expand the resort. All of these elements are important right now, as Disney is actively planning to develop areas in its Florida parks, which we'll discuss a little bit more in this episode. But all of this does come at a significant cost to Disney. Unlike most special districts, landowners and residents on the Disney property will still not be able to vote in board members. Instead, the CFTOD board members will continue to be appointed by the governor. But Disney is trading the possibility of direct representation for a sure path forward in terms of development. Essentially, it is now abandoning its state lawsuit against the district and pausing its federal appeal in exchange for a clear path forward in resort development and hopefully a more friendly board at the CFTOD. Beyond this, both sides may have also been concerned about what information would be released if cases went to trial in the upcoming months. In terms of reframing Disney's identity, the settlement and the pause on the federal appeal is a shift away from politics, which should be helpful at the resort as well. The shift to decenter political messages away from entertainment is a decision that Iger has been softly pushing now for about a year asking studio teams to focus more on entertainment, less so on messaging, in creating new films and series. I believe that both message and entertainment will still be significant parts of future Disney films and series, but Iger is presently asking development teams to increase the entertainment elements and to decrease those elements focused on messaging, be they political, cultural, or otherwise. The tonal shift for the Florida resort simply matches what has already been happening for many months at the studio. In short, a settlement allows everyone to put these political disagreements behind them, which at this point may be the best outcome, even if it does come at a significant cost to Disney. Continued legislation, which was the path that Disney was actively pursuing as recently as January, that is, just a few days before DeSantis abandoned his bid for the White House, would continue to create bad blood between Disney and the district as various documents were released, accusations made, and courtroom drama unfolded. Continued legislation was also likely to alienate some potential Disney customers, even if the two cases ended in Disney's favor. On a personal level, I still feel that freedom of speech, no matter what your politics are, is essential to defend and preserve so that it's open to all. One of the losers here are businesses who now need to be a little more concerned how political speech might affect their relationship with government bodies. But from a practical standpoint, the merits of Disney's case may have finally been outweighed by the financial necessity of new developments in Florida. In my opinion, Disney may have had the better case, particularly in regards to the First Amendment, but also they had more to lose in terms of income and public relations in pursuing their case. The finances of the entire matter appears to have reached a point where Disney and the state, which relies on Disney as a financial engine, were both willing to put aside their views to hopefully create a road forward that allows Disney to expand its business, to have at least a slightly stronger working relationship between Disney and the district, and to bring in more tourists that deeply help with the state's financial goals. So this settlement hopefully is a compromise that will allow Disney to more fully focus on developing and managing the resort, which is crucial now at this juncture as Universal prepares to open its third theme park just down the road from Disney. An agreement with the CFTOD is also important at this point, as the financial emphasis areas inside the Disney company are beginning to change. I believe that most financial analysts expected Disney to direct available cash, that is, profits from the other company divisions such as the parks to Disney Plus, as the service got up and going back in 2019. I don't think that anyone expected for Disney Plus to be the massive financial drain that it has been for years. But now, 5 years after the launch, as Disney Plus is at least moving toward some type of financial neutrality, the Disney company has or will soon have available funds to invest deeply in large projects for the parks. And that investment is needed. But that investment likely was never going to happen on the large scale until Disney felt greater security in its relationship with the CFTOD and the state of Florida. Now, perhaps, plans for some meaningful expansion can slowly start to move forward in regards to Disney World. Our next story is almost surely related in some way to the settlement between Disney and the CFTOD. Before this settlement, Disney insisted that its 2022 comprehensive plan, which was arranged with the Reedy Creek Board, was the legal tool that would define how Disney expanded for the following decade up through 2032. But the CFTOD viewed that agreement as contractually unjustifiable and wanted permit and zoning input for any future Disney expansion during those same years. This dispute contributed to where we are now, with no large projects presently being developed at Disney World. The types of projects that have been greenlit in recent years have required minimal permitting, putting Tiana's Bayou Adventure into the existing Splash Mountain structure, putting the Zootopia attraction into the existing Tree of Life, reworking the show for Country Bears, and swapping out existing cabins at Fort Wilderness for new DVC cabins. None of these improvements represents a meaningful change to the footprint of the resort. This, I think, is probably by design. Though ex-CEO Bob Chapek dropped the ball in terms of greenlighting developments that would counter Epic Universe over at Universal, current CEO Bob Iger is now trying to move in that direction again. It's probably not a coincidence that some of this news is leaking out just days before the shareholders meeting during the first week of April. I think that there's a strong likelihood that either Iger or Parks chairperson Josh D'Amaro will make an announcement at the shareholders meeting that either defines or suggests that Disney will soon move forward with capacity expansion in Florida. The expansion of Animal Kingdom has long been a rumored possibility for Disney World, almost always on the site of the old Dino Land. Dino Land was in part meant to resemble a low-cost amusement park overseen by fictional characters Hester and Chester. The exact story here is that years ago, Chester and Hester ran a small gas station, but when dinosaur fossils were discovered nearby, which attracted a lot of tourists, they expanded their business, building a small amusement park in their parking lot and converting the gas station into a gift shop, with the idea that they would offer a more whimsical take on dinosaurs than those scientists up the road. And maybe the theming here was maybe a little too exact, because Dino Land for years looked just like a roadside attraction arranged on an old parking lot. So for aspiring Imagineers who are listening, take note. Not only does theming need to be realistic, it is realistic here, but theming needs to create a space that deeply attracts guests. Did Dino Land look like a roadside attraction? It sure did. Did a lot of guests come to Disney World hoping to see a couple of off-the-shelf rides that recreated a local amusement area? Probably not so much. Back in 2001 and 2002, years before Expedition Everest, when Animal Kingdom lacked rides, particularly thrill rides, Dino Land was a quick way to add capacity and ride variety to that recently opened theme park. And now that Animal Kingdom has Pandora and other more sophisticated attractions, perhaps Dino Land has outlived its usefulness. For a while now, Dino Land has been the prime location for expansion at the Magic Kingdom, with a few concepts being considered in recent years. Nearly 2 years ago, we saw artwork that suggested a Moana boat ride and a version of Zootopia might occupy this space, and more recently we saw artwork that suggested an updated version of the Indiana Jones attraction might take over the dinosaur attraction, as they have the same ride vehicles and track layout. And the village from Encanto with the casita would take over the rest of Dino Land, largely where Chester and Hester once stood. Disney hasn't committed officially to any of these plans, and I'm guessing that the financials from the recent Indy movie may have given Disney a little pause about the future viability of that project, but a permit was recently filed for over 350 parking spaces arranged behind the Asia area of the park for construction workers. Also, this same permit included plans for 5 temporary structures, likely for on-site planning and management. These structures aren't next to the construction site. The construction site is largely next to a guest parking lot, so a path and road would connect this new parking area to what remains of Dino Land. The 5 trailers are divided into 2 categories. which suggests that this construction project has at least 2 stages. 3 of the trailers marked for WDI will likely appear first. The other 2 marked future proposed offices are both for WDI and outside contractors. So this may indicate that WDI, likely the regional branch of WDI that is attached to Disney World, may be on the project and supervising work before additional outside teams are brought in. If I had to take a guess about how this would work, it would be this. A large number of people in WDI in Florida are about to finish their work on Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Some of those may be shifted over to an Animal Kingdom project later this year. Beyond that, a lot of companies that specialize in highly detailed themed construction, such as unique hardscape and concrete design, are presently employed by Universal for Epic Universe. The future proposed offices here at Animal Kingdom may be used for some third-party businesses once their work at Universal is finished, likely early next year. Again, this part here about how personnel might expand on the Animal Kingdom project is just an educated guess. Regardless, a permit like this indicates that work may begin soon, demoing some parts of Dinoland, saving some buildings to be rethemed or repurposed, and then bringing in a very large crew to remake the area. That there are over 350 parking spots for construction suggests that this will be a large project. I went back and looked at aerial photos for the construction of Pandora. Due to Pandora's location, more construction workers were able to park next to the site. But it does seem like this new proposed lot will hold slightly more cars, which suggests either a larger construction project or a quicker pace of work. And here I'm going to go with the latter. Regardless, this permit suggests that work in Animal Kingdom should begin fairly soon. If we look at the likely completion of Tiana's Bayou Adventure, which I would place in early summer, and then allow for a month of minor adjustments, that would mean that some work here might begin late summer or perhaps early in fall, with another wave of likely workers coming in as project areas in Epic Universe finish up. But again, there are no official Disney announcements, which includes announcements about any timelines. In this, we're just reading the tea leaves from one permit filing as best we can. The rumor that I've repeatedly heard is that if Disney moves forward with the Indy ride, it will represent the early version of Indy rather than his later incarnations, which will be great for visitors who are aged somewhere between 45 and 65, and maybe a little less so for visitors who are significantly younger. That is, there are still aspects of this plan that I'm trying to work through. But I also recognize that perhaps the viability of current indie projects doesn't really matter. I know very few people who would identify themselves as deep fans of Avatar. But a tepid fan base didn't damage Pandora at Animal Kingdom in any way. Even if you aren't a deep fan of the Avatar movies, Pandora is still a lovely space, and Flight of Passage is an impressive presentation of engineering, placemaking, screen images, and sensory effects. I think the same is true for the excellent Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland. Even if it's been years since you've seen an Indiana Jones film, the ride is still spectacular and speaks not only to the Indy franchise, but to the larger genre of exotic adventure films. And the ride works perfectly from this angle as well. Even if you know absolutely nothing about Indiana Jones on this ride, you're on an exotic adventure through a temple that, due to a curse, is falling apart all around you. That is, though Disney has learned that IP projects increase attendance, I think one of the lessons beyond this is that a truly impressive attraction overcomes any IP. And if you look at this new proposed Indiana Jones ride from that perspective, I think it makes a good deal of sense in that the ride experience easily overcomes the ride IP if, for example, you've never connected with the Indiana Jones films. The new area would reuse many structures from Dinoland. I've put the artwork for this proposed area on top of existing aerial shots many times. The show building for the dinosaur attraction likely remains exactly the same, with a new entrance facade which is arranged as a pyramid, exactly where the Dino Institute facade presently stands. Some restaurant, retail, and restroom buildings remain as well. Triceratops Spin with new ride vehicles will be in the same place under a new roof structure. Some of the paths appeared to be reworked and widened, likely to accommodate perceived higher levels of crowds. All of this construction and development work, at least so far, could be completed reasonably quickly, as most of this work involves changing stages and facades rather than the bones of the structures. The one entirely new area will be the Encanto space with its casita, which will go roughly where Primeval World once stood. The interesting thing here is that there doesn't seem to be that much room for a large show building, especially one as large as that used by Dinosaur. Behind the old Primeval World area are two back-of-the-house structures. Those could be demoed, I suppose, but neither of those structures are particularly large. Together, they are maybe 1/3 the size of the Dinosaur show building. And beyond them is a narrow perimeter road, and right on the other side of that is a large body of water. So there's room here for some show expansion areas, but nowhere near enough to make a show area similar to the scope of Dinosaur or Flight of Passage. The show building might be about the size of the show building for Mystic Manor, but Mystic Manor is a reasonably low capacity attraction, pulling in about 1,400 guests per hour, compared to, say, Remy's Ratatouille Adventure, which is at 2,200. I think the size of the structure here, unless we're looking at some type of indoor water ride like Navi River Journey, will likely be a limiting factor in terms of hourly throughput. Also, as the Encanto area will be an all-new development, not a retheming of an existing attraction, I would expect that this area to take longer to complete than the indie revamp of the dinosaur attraction. For many who watch the Disney Company, the surprising aspect of the Splash Mountain redo is how quickly it's being accomplished, at least in Florida, far faster than any recent Disney project. It's possible that Disney, assuming that this is now their new construction pace, could gut existing show stages on Dinosaur and bring in new show scenes and remake the facade in under 2 years, maybe even a little less than that. We don't yet have an opening date for Tiana's Bayou Adventure, but I'm guessing that the overall retheming will take a total of 18 months, from the closure of Splash Mountain to roughly when I think the attraction will now open with its new theme, which I'm guessing will be early summer. Logs over on the remade Splash Mountain have been going through the attraction with Disney workers for this past week, which means that testing has now begun. But to move back to the expansion at Animal Kingdom, the Tropical Americas area, assuming it does include a version of Indy and Encanto, has a number of interesting prospects for the resort beyond the rides. Animal Kingdom presently offers large exhibits focused on Africa and Asia. With this new expansion area, it would be easy to include exhibit areas focused on plants and wildlife of South and possibly Central America, with the area presumably called Tropical Americas, which would expand out the zoological regions represented in the park. And there's one other aspect on which I'm going to speculate. Whatever is built here in the old Dinoland, I'm guessing, will also speak to some type of nighttime attraction. It may be something as simple as the nighttime lighting package that exists in Pandora, maybe a large projection mapping experience arranged around the casita, but maybe it could be something more. For Disney to pick Animal Kingdom as the next place for an expansion, I suspect that this expansion needs to speak to more than just rides. Magic Kingdom is the park that needs additional capacity and a large refresh more than any of the other three parks. And for Animal Kingdom to go first, I suspect this means that whatever is happening in this revised Dino Land has the potential to overcome this park's long-standing problem, simply that hardly anyone stays here after dusk when the animals go to bed, leaving Animal Kingdom guests to shift over to other parks, particularly Epcot and Magic Kingdom, which makes them both feel very crowded in the evening for the nighttime spectaculars. The expansion area for the Tropical Americas project, which is right next to the parking lot and far from the animal enclosures for the Africa and Asia sections, noise levels in terms of animal comfort still matter in this section of the park, but perhaps a little less so than by the safari. With that, there's the possibility of a relatively low-noise nighttime show or presentation in this expansion area. As there's no development beyond the far reach of this pad, there might be the possibility of using drones, which are relatively quiet, to form some type of image-based nighttime show, with the drones effectively flying and landing in an area visible to guests but not populated by guests. Disney has used drones over water at Disney Springs in years past, and just behind the casita and behind that perimeter road is a body of water that presumably would be safe for a drone experience with no one standing beneath them during the show. Again, this idea is nothing more than pure speculation on my part, and as long as I'm speculating, I'll also add that the lights for the Sunset Safari are still working over at the Kilimanjaro Savannah. They have been tested post-COVID. Over the past year, I've talked with many people about this. Turning the lights on and restarting this nighttime experience would require nearly all of the current Kilimanjaro Safari drivers to be retrained for the nighttime excursion. The nighttime safari was never wildly popular with guests, especially first-time guests, who were confused why so few animals were out on the savannah at night. But ride expectations can be fixed here with a new pre-show that explains that this trip at night is to view a few unique animals who are only active after dark. Again, a return of some form of the old Sunset Safari is nothing more than personal speculation, but overall I think something in terms of nighttime interest in this new area, perhaps coupled with other nighttime experiences in the park, is in play here to get this project at Animal Kingdom to leapfrog over projects for other parks where the need for new attractions is perhaps greater. The news about the Animal Kingdom expansion was leaked by way of permits. Almost surely Disney knew that the information would be quickly leaked once the permit for construction parking and trailer offices was filed. But to loop back into our first story today about the settlement between Disney and the CFTOD, I'm pretty sure that Disney is looking for a far larger development plan beyond this Tropical Americas project to be approved for the coming years for the Florida resort. And that, I'm also guessing, is one of the reasons that the two sides came together for the CFTOD settlement. It's unknown which side first reached out to the other. Did DeSantis' team reach out to Disney, or was it the other way around? It is also unknown exactly how Disney would like to expand the resort through a modified 2020 comprehensive plan or with a new development plan, but it's possible that Governor DeSantis may have let some of this slip in a recent public statement by suggesting what might have been privately discussed between Disney and the governor's office. Here is what he said. I mean, certainly, you look at Universal, they're doing Epic Universe. It's going to be a huge game changer for this region. I've got to think that Disney would have an interest in maybe offering another one. The district will be ready to negotiate something to be able to be good for the state of Florida, be good for jobs, be good for all those things. The idea here of offering another one in this context means Disney offering another theme park similar to Epic Universe. Personally, I think Disney has more to gain by upgrading, expanding, and fixing its current parks. I'm not sure a fifth theme park is really going to make families add an extra day or two to what is typically a 5-day vacation in Florida. But the shape of DeSantis' comment here, the idea that large expansions are presently in discussion, puts a favorable spin on what we might hear later this year about future developments in Florida, perhaps with little hints at the shareholders meeting next week, and more likely with some partial reveal at the D23 Expo, or whatever they're calling the Expo this year, when that happens in August. In our final story today, we'll take a look at the lead-up and the heat-up to the 2024 vote for the Disney board. We've talked about this before, specifically how activist investor Nelson Peltz has promoted himself and ex-Disney executive Jay Rizzullo to replace 2 existing board members so that Peltz and Rizzullo have more control over the future of the Disney company. In a letter, Disney laid out its reasons why investors should vote to continue with the current 12 board members who have worked with Iger and not place Peltz and Rizzullo on the board. Investors were told by Disney that Disney has the right strategy to drive profitable growth and value creation for shareholders and has made substantial progress against our objectives to make our business more efficient and effective, including a sharpened focus on our greatest brand and franchise assets, a continued commitment to cutting costs, and a reinstatement of the dividend. Following this, Disney repeated its call for investors not to vote for outside nominees. There are actually 2 sets of outside nominees this year. One group put forward by Nelson Peltz's Treon Group and another by Blackwell. But at this point, the only outside nominees that are seen as possibly viable are those associated with Nelson Peltz. Peltz and Treon have signaled that they would focus on reworking Disney Plus toward profitability, improving the quality and profits from films, and strategically invest in the parks. One of the problems here is that Peltz's platform, which is focused on strategic investment directed toward relatively quick profits and a higher stock price, played out much better last October when Disney's stock price was $79. It's presently at $122, which is a 53% increase. Part of this increase was accomplished by Disney buying back $3 billion of shares, which slightly raised the value of the remaining shares, but part of this was accomplished by improved investor confidence after lower loss levels with Disney Plus, the partnership between Disney and Epic Games, a de-escalation in the battle with Governor DeSantis, and what appears to be now a workable plan to expand the American parks in the upcoming decade. Still, some of the problems that Peltz points to have stretched on now for years, specifically a lack of profitability with Disney Plus, a murky plan for Disney's theatrical releases, and an even murkier plan for how to manage ESPN, which, at least to me, looks like the one division that doesn't blend particularly well with the other Disney assets. Because of this, Nelson Peltz and Treon have picked up some supporters, among them CalPERS, which is the second largest retirement fund in America, who will be voting for Peltz and Rizzullo. More significantly, ISS, which is the Institutional Shareholders Services, advised shareholders to vote for Peltz. ISS is an advisory firm that is supported by various investment fund managers, which offers guidance on how funds should vote in corporate elections. Even though ISS cites financial underperformance as one of Disney's issues, ISS was largely focused on the ongoing problem with secession. Issues with succession planning a few years back produced Bob Chapek as an outside choice to replace Iger, and ISS feels that with Iger's next proposed retirement coming up in 2026, Disney still isn't focused enough on finding and training a highly qualified replacement. This, I'd say, is a reasonable concern. On our podcast, we've already speculated that it's possible that the 2026 date might actually be extended again, largely because those being considered to become the next CEO primarily have experience in just one division of the company and likely would need to have some more exposure to other divisions to be a viable advocate for the entire enterprise. But that discussion, of course, is something for the years ahead. The ISS recommendation should produce many votes, at least for Peltz, not for Rizzullo, who they are not recommending, which in ways splits the issue. Specifically, ISS would like shareholders to vote for Peltz and withhold votes for Maria Elena Lagomarsino, who they feel contributed to a lack of previous succession planning. Shareholders can vote up through the end of April 2nd. They can either vote for the Disney nominees, or they can withhold support from some Disney nominees by voting against them and instead vote for the two names put forward by the Trion Group, namely Peltz and Rizzullo. From my perspective, I feel that with Disney's stock price presently at $122 and still rising, that the current Disney board is likely now safe. A couple months back, I suggested that if Disney could keep the stock reasonably and consistently above $100, they would likely be fine, as most investor discontent was focused on the low share price. A stock price of $122 is higher than where I thought it would be during the first week of April, but still, in looking over the situation, Iger does appear to be nervous and pointedly concerned that some outside influences, such as Peltz, might find a seat on the board and then rework his vision for the company. Not only did Disney put together an instructional video using old animation of Ludwig von Drake coupled with a new voiceover that explained how shareholders, according to Disney, should vote, for the past few weeks, Disney has also been walking out some high-profile endorsements. Some of these endorsements, I should point out, come from people with development deals presently overseen by Iger, so maybe take a couple of those with a grain of salt, but beyond those, there are some serious stakeholders who are siding with Iger and the current board. These include George Lucas, who after Disney bought Lucasfilm, became the largest individual stakeholder in the company, the grandchildren of Walt and Roy Disney, former Disney CEO Michael Eisner, and even Bob Weiss, once president of Imagineering, though now employed by the architectural and planning firm Gensler. As this battle has become public, with Disney assembling some high-profile supporters to sway stockholders, it reveals how unsure Iger is about how this vote will turn out later this week. Again, Disney, like any large company, is not without its challenges and struggles. Disney has fans who own stock because they like the company, and people in that group may vote based on personal experience with recent films and park visits, which is not a bad way to go. But I think that many institutional investors will likely be sated by the higher stock price, which has risen over 50% in 6 months. Still, the ISS recommendation for Peltz will influence some fund managers. Exactly how many is it going to influence? Well, that's the big question right now. And with only a couple of days left to vote, this surely will be the next big story that unfurls at the Disney company, and one that we will need to explore on the podcast in the weeks ahead. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Often, at the end of our show, I announce the intended topic for next week, but honestly, I'm just going to have to see how much news shakes out of the shareholders meeting before I firm up a plan for next week's show. We still have a little bit to cover in our story about Walt Disney and Larry Watkin. Also in that series, we are now up to their best film, Darby O'Gill. But in terms of where we are right now, in 2024, we're at a point where another wave of meaningful changes is beginning to reshape the Disney company. My sense right now is that it will likely be another news-heavy week with some compelling announcements. But again, we'll have to wait and see. As you know, we're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and the parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Disney company. We are funded entirely by listener contributions, specifically by listeners who join us on Bandcamp as monthly supporters. On Bandcamp, you'll find over 200 episodes not available on iTunes or anywhere else. But the best reason to join us there is to support the work we do here and to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can support us by becoming a monthly subscriber at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in our show notes. So, until next week, this is Todd James Pierce.